Okay, let's go ahead and get ourselves going this evening. We got a lot of fun things to talk about today, and hopefully we'll be able to give you some help in terms of some of your last things for the assignment tonight. So I'll try to take some questions at the break and stick around a little bit afterwards. I guess we don't really have office hours proper tonight. We'll stick around for a little while. We don't have them. No, we'll stick around for a little while, stuff like that. But we're going to encourage you to kind of simplify and just get it done in terms of what's going on, because you got other fun things to be working on besides this, right? Yeah, I don't know. You don't want to spend all day working on your parts. There's always room to make them better, and a lot of what you've been doing really, they are very incredibly ambitious. You guys are really doing very nice work with the parts. So yeah, I don't know. You've pushed them far enough. Okay, in terms of what we're going to be talking to you about today, we're going to pick up with the thread of rendering a little more and kind of really speak specifically about exterior rendering and some of the things about exterior renderings that actually make them pretty easy to do. Yeah, I think you saw last time as we got started with doing some renderings that, having done a lot of preliminary work of setting up the cameras and putting materials into the model, renderings is actually a fairly easy extension because it's really more like just turning on a mode and making snapshots of all these things that you've already been setting up. So we're going to talk specifically about exterior renderings and some tips for going through and doing those effectively. And you're going to find that they're actually sort of the easier type of the renderings to do. Interior renderings, we'll find out, are a little bit harder because it's really all just a question of lighting control. And as you probably know, when we were outside and we're taking photographs out in the bright sun, they tend to turn out pretty good because the sun is just so bright as a source, and we don't really control it. Almost all exterior photographs end up looking pretty good because the sun, we know how to sort of work with the sun and it makes everything bright and happy. Interior shots are much more subtle because interior shots involve, maybe some bright light coming in through a window, but you have some sort of artificial light in here, and you'd like people to be well lit in the foreground, but you may have this background light which is very intense. Controlling the range of light in interior photos is very hard, and you may already know this when you're doing your own work. That if you take snapshots, sometimes you have to take it into Photoshop or into iPhoto or something like that, and just correct the lighting a little bit. And usually it's just all about changing the range of lighting, what the high value is that wants to be considered, what the low value is, so that you can bring color out and actually sort of correct some of the lighting in there. And the same basic principles all apply to rendering. So anything, if you know photography and know how to play around with photographs digitally, rendering is very easy. Okay. On the second side of what we're going to be doing today, we are going to start moving down a path of really designing buildings in a very different way. If you have been given a program for a building of any size, this whole notion of sort of building a building up one room at a time, really thinking very precisely about how this room's going to connect to that room, and we'll put a door in there, and I need another conference room over here, and it's really just not an effective way to design a larger building. For larger buildings, we tend not to design them from bottom up. We go from top down, where we say, hey, I need to go ahead and have about 300,000 square feet of building. In order to accomplish that, there's an overall shape I might create that will give me that much square footage. And within that shape, we often sort of fit in some sort of structural skeleton to be able to support it, put in shafts and stairs and all the different sort of building elements that are necessary to kind of get circulation through it. And then we sort of start subdividing it up into more offices and conference rooms and cafes and all the little things that ultimately articulate the space. So sort of a very different approach. And we're going to be looking at that approach today, and really looking at how you, at a high level, do something I'll call conceptual design and use something called mass floors to get some real rapid feedback about how much space are you really creating. Okay. And from that, we'll think about not only do we want to sort of achieve the architectural space, but think about how some of our early decisions start to affect the building performance. So what the energy impact is of shaping a building in different ways, or maybe orienting on the side a little bit differently. A lot of sort of potential impacts to all those things. So we'll look at some very simple tools that, based on a 10-minute design, you can sort of get a pretty quick estimate of really what the 30-year energy life of this building will be and contrast them. Yeah. So that's where we're going in the second part. So let's go ahead and jump into the first part, and let's talk about rendering and see if we can just answer some questions there. So to get going on rendering, I'm going to open up the Revit building project again. That's the one that we looked at last time. So if you want to open it, it's in session 12 on coursework. See if we can bring it all up. Okay, so this is just an exterior view of this building, and this is really what I'll call the shaded view. It's kind of still a little bit cartoony, and we looked at it a little bit last time about how we can start adjusting things like that. So in this, there's some 3D views already set up, including one from the parking area. Okay. And that shaded view is kind of okay for getting started. The nice thing about the shaded view is it's always up to date, so if we make any changes in the model, this view will always be up to date. It's not a snapshot in time, it really is a live model. Okay, so we'll keep on updating. And what we looked at last time was that, there was some real simple stuff we could do to just start making this a little bit better in terms of how it's representing things. We could, for example, just change it from being shaded to being more realistic. And what's happening when we make things realistic is we're shifting from just the coloration, the color of the different materials, and maybe some sort of a surface pattern, to actually using a photographic image and merging that on in there. So you'll see a couple things happen along the way here. The concrete actually has more of a kind of pattern to it. The trees went from being big old blobs to really being really articulated as trunks and leaves and all those sorts of things. They're casting some shadows in there. Let me zoom on in here a little bit closer so you can sort of see better. Let's see what's going on. It's going to regenerate it. So it's not too awfully bad in terms of getting started, but we can even go through and make this look a little bit better. For example, last time we looked at this whole issue of graphic display options, where within here you have all these different choices. For example, this is the realistic graphic style, but we can turn off the edges, which I sometimes like to do. What happens when I turn off the edges is those thin black lines which are surrounding everything disappear. Okay, and it's just a little more realistic in terms of what's going on. It's just, I don't know, the world doesn't have little black outlines to everything, so your eye will just read it a little bit better in terms of how that's going to work. What else can we do? We can play all sorts of games with the shadows. It doesn't work very well outside here. Inside there's this whole notion of ambient shadows, which I think is kind of cool. That's the whole notion that there's really two different types of lighting going on right now. There's light coming from the sun, and that's pretty bright. It's very harsh. It tends to cast a very strong shadow. But there's also something called ambient light, and light reflecting around in a room. And if you'd like to kind of consider the effect of the light that's reflected, it tends to just soften the shadows. And I'm not sure if you can sort of see it exactly, but even though, if you look, I'm very sensitive to this. When you look in the corners of rooms, it's not just sort of this pure kind of off-white color. It's a little bit darker up in the corner. And the reason it gets a little bit darker to your eye up in the corner is actually as light goes bouncing around, it bounces off this surface and bounces back over here. It always mirrors back at the same incident angle. Actually, less light gets into that corner, just because of the way things are basically bouncing away. It's hard for the light to get back in that corner. So what tends to happen is, even around the whole top of the ceiling, there's this little band where it's a little bit darker up there. And your eye perceives this very well. Everything that you go looking around, you look around the bulletin boards, you look around a lot of things, like objects seem to have these little shadows around them. And the reason that is that the ambient light that's being bounced around is being blocked by the geometry. So things tend to have these funny shimmery shadows around them. And that's what ambient shadows is about. It just sort of makes things look a little bit better. Lighting's kind of an interesting one to pay attention to. It's going to be very important to us. On the outside of buildings, we tend to look at things being mostly controlled by the sun, but we have the ability to say that not only are we considering the sunlight, but we're also considering some interior artificial lights. And as we go through and put lights into a building, we can actually control, all these lights have a certain amount of luminance they're throwing, and that's a parameter. We can model that accurately. So we can say that with the effect of a 500 watt bulb versus a 100 watt bulb, or to some level of density, that all works out very nicely. For exterior renderings, I tend to only consider the sun because it speeds things up. every light that we consider has to be resolved, and calculations are done saying, given that source of light, how that light's going to bounce around to other surfaces, figure out how much lighting is on that surface. So the sun is like one bright light. It's easy to calculate. Putting in all the lights, if you think about this room, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so there's at least 12 bulbs in this room, from these like strip lights above our head. So that's 12 times of calculations that have to be done if we consider the interior lights. So it's much quicker just to only consider the exterior sun, if you don't need to consider the interior. So for an exterior rendering, at night, I would consider the interior lights, but during the day, the sun's so bright, the effect of the lighting in the building is really negligible, to what we're going to see on the outside of the building. Okay, now the sun is very sensitive to all sorts of things, like where it is in the sky at different times of the years is something you want to control. So let's talk about that, because we haven't really talked about that very much. When we think about the sun and lighting in general, there's a couple of different ways we can approach this. There's the notion of lighting just really being some point source of light, and we can locate that somewhere, a very bright light, everywhere from, the top right. Okay, top right is actually, if we take a look at it, okay, in any view, if I choose sunlight from the top right, it'll always be over here, casting a shadow kind of from the top right, kind of to the lower left. And the way to think about that is relative to the camera. So my camera's pointing right here. The azimuth is 135, so kind of measure 135 degrees around, so kind of over my right shoulder here somewhere, 35 degrees up in the sky. Okay, which is it's an okay approximation for where the sun may be. Yeah, it's a little bit artificial though, because that location in any view, it's not really dependent on the orientation of the building on the side or really where the building is on Earth. So rather than doing that, and those are good for kind of quick renderings, what you tend to want to do is actually give your building a location. So for example, we have a building here, looks like it's currently located in Manchester, New Hampshire. We can go ahead and kind of put it somewhere else. So again, what I'm doing is I'm saying, let's just give it a still image. Let's put it somewhere else. Let's think about where we want to put it. So Manchester, New Hampshire is kind of okay. Where else can we put this building? There's some place that might have an interesting lighting condition. Anywhere in the world. We'll take, give me your hometown. Where's your hometown? Houston. Okay, Houston's easy. Come on down here. Houston, Texas. Let's see if we can search that. Okay. Houston has a couple things that are a little bit different than New Hampshire. Houston's a lot further south than New Hampshire, so the sun's not, there's less effect of the timing of the year in Houston than there is in New Hampshire. It's subtle, but there actually is less because it's kind of less at a more southerly latitude. Houston also has kind of a very different weather pattern from New Hampshire. So locating a project in a specific place is good because we get the latitude and longitude, we'll get the appropriate sunlight for it, okay, as well as actually being able to load in the energy profile. So what the rain is in Houston, what the temperature is during the winter, what the temperature is during the summer. And that probably is very, very different than New Hampshire. Okay, there's a big database of weather stations and really locations that we can use, and it works for anywhere. It has cities in Dubai, it has cities in India, it has cities in China. All these cities are in here, so you can go ahead and find anything you want. So, for example, if you want the building to be in Shanghai instead, we can go ahead and put it, somewhere New Pudong. Okay, and it'll have the appropriate lighting, it'll have the appropriate energy settings, all those sorts of things. So I'll put it over there. Okay, once we set a location, we have the whole issue of the date and time. And in the Northern Hemisphere, well, I'm actually going to show you what the effective date and time is. There's an easy tool that'll actually help us understand this, but we can set a specific time and a specific date, and it'll work. Now, the timing, whether it's 8 a.m. or 3 p.m., that we can adjust. This actually bothers some people. It says 6/22/2004. Okay, you really want it to be, 11/6 or 11/5 is it today? 2013. truth is, whether it's 2004 or 2013, hopefully doesn't matter. If the sun's moving like around in the sky year to year, then we've got a bigger problem than building this building. So it should go ahead and be repeatable year after year. So that shouldn't hopefully matter to us. But let me show you how this works. Just by changing, you'll actually see the lighting on the building changed a little bit there. Let me say OK. And it'll zoom on out, see if we can sort of see the difference. Let me zoom on out. Actually, it's a little hard to see in this view. Let me just switch to the default 3D view and show it to you. In a perspective view, it's a little hard to see. So here's our building. It's kind of hanging around on site. Oh, we were in the parking area, so I think we were over here. And as best I can tell, that's kind of the south side of the building right now. Okay. If we actually want to see the effect of sun and shadow, what we can do is turn on shadows. There's actually a little tool right down at the bottom called shadows on or shadows off. See if I can turn the shadows on. That wasn't all that dramatic. Let's kind of show you that. Okay, there are some shadows, but of course these shadows are for a specific time and date. You want to be able to kind of control that. So if you want to change that, you can go through and reset the time the way we did it. Where you can actually do this, you can turn on something called the sun path. The sun path is a little, again, a little widget down there in the bottom of the screen, the bottom of the display area. And if you turn that on, it actually brings up a heliodot. So I'll turn on the sun path. See what it looks like. Let me zoom on out so you can see. Okay, so this sun path is actually showing the path of the sun in the sky for, currently it's set to May 10th. Okay, there's where the sun is rising at like 5:12 in the morning. It's somehow setting in the evening there. I guess that's 6:30 over there where the sun goes down beneath the horizon. You can sort of see where the north-south is. But if you want to see the effect of shadows at different times of the day, you can either click here and type in a different time. So if you want to see the shadows at 8 in the morning, the sun will move over there. Okay, it's kind of bright right now. You can barely see the shadows. They're kind of on this side. They're still relatively short. Let me move even earlier in the morning. Actually, let's do something kind of like in here. What is it? It is 11:05. Okay. Notice the path of the sun is a little bit different now. It's not nearly as high in the sky. So if you get down to something like, oh, let's switch it around. Oh, like 7 in the morning. You'll see you have sort of very long shadows going in the background. If we move up here high in the sky here, I kind of clicked around noontime, I'm guessing. Oops, I set the path there. The other thing I can do is actually just drag the sun. Let me see if I can do that. I'll drag the sun in the sky. And as I move the sun up closer to noontime, you see the shadows look a little bit different. I'm going to move them down there. Now, it's interesting. This is actually in Shanghai. In Shanghai, I'm not actually seeing as much of a difference as I would expect in terms of the change between the summer and winter. That range you're seeing right there, that's the range of height of the sun paths in the sky from the lowest range, the one that's closest to me. That's the winter time. The summertime's up at the top, when the sun's up higher in the sky, stuff like that. But it actually makes a very big difference in terms of being able to go through and like I figure out where the shadows are. That'll look a little bit different in different parts of the world. So for example, let's see if I can actually make the difference. I'm going to go back to the Manage tab and I'm going to change the project location. Another way I can do this. So Shanghai is about in here. if I went to, oh, what's very high, like Oslo or something like that, or St. Petersburg or something pretty high up in the north. See if I can see much difference in there. Okay. When we're very high, oops, there we are right there. It just adjusted for the date. When we're very high up north or very far south, same sort of effect. Notice that the range of motion, it never gets as high in the sky. In fact, it actually gets down onto the horizon. So there are times when it's completely dark. There's times when it's completely bright. Kind of in there. So very far at the extremes, you can sort of get behaviors like this, okay, which leads to very long shadows pretty much throughout the year. If you switch to another environment, let me try this. I'm going to switch over to Singapore, which is just about on the equator. And we choose its sun. Okay. Notice the sun is always high in the sky in Singapore. It never gets very low in the sky. And it's very strange, the quality of light that that brings. You never really have long shadows. Even all year long, you almost always have, like, you know, very direct shadows that are coming straight down from the high up in the sky. So just a very different quality of light because of that. So the important thing, what's it also really about, ultimately you just got to accurately locate your project to get the right lighting effect, and then choose the right date and time. And be aware of that, because if there's no light in your exterior rendering, it probably has to do with, oh, you're too early in the morning, sometimes you're at night, and you're just not having any sunlight because of that. You just need to sort of go through and adjust those things. So let me go back. I'm going to go to a different view of the building courtyard. That's kind of a good view. I will, kind of play around with those sun settings. Well, the graphic display options. And we can play with the lighting. So in Singapore, where I think we are right now, I think that's going to be a little dramatic. We'll put it back to Houston. Okay, and then like 10 in the morning. So we'll see what happens to the light there. Looks pretty bright. Okay, other things we can do to play around with this are we can also go through and put the realistic on. We can also go through and play around with the whole issue of the background. This right now just has kind of a very kind of plain background, this sort of plain white background. If you'd like to go through and have a little bit of background in there, you can go through and set up a gradient. That's kind of an easy way to get a background. That just gives you something that ranges from two different colors, like it could be a deep blue to kind of just a gray blue. You can kind of choose how blue you want your sky to be, depending on the artistic effect you want. You can go through and put clouds in the background. A little bit of sky. Okay. And that'll actually be adapting to like the time of the day and stuff like that. You can also even go through and put an image back there. So let me show you this, because this is actually kind of a cool thing too. For the image, you can choose an image, and in the like handouts from last time, or in the it's again session 12, I actually put a whole bunch of images out there that you can use if you like. I'll go out there to where I store them here, background images. You see I got a bunch of stuff out there, just all these little images from just of background scenes that I collected. So for example, if I want to go through and put this building in front of a fiery sunset or a very stormy sunset, I can choose an image, say OK, and then when I apply it, I put a little sunset behind it. Nah, it's not a very good looking sunset. Go for a different one.
But the trick for all this is really, if you're going to start playing with the background images and stuff like that, always go through and choose sort of something that has, it's almost like the right perspective. Because when you're playing these kinds of games, it's really up to you to make sure that the imagery really matches what you're actually trying to display there. Let me try that again. Image. Don't think I actually saved it. How about that? That looks pretty dramatic. It looks like it's there. It looks like it's there. I want to apply it. Why is it not applying? Don't know. I'll figure that out. Try a different one. Da, da, da. Image. Okay there. Looks like it's there. Say okay there. I'm not getting the apply. That's what's bothering me. Not sure why that's not coming in right now. Now we'll figure it out. Okay, doing things as these just kind of views where we're looking at changing the appearance. Okay, the nice thing about just changing to the kind of realistic appearance is these are still live views because we can go through and still do things like we're used to. We can go through and do some looking. We can do some walking if we want to. We can basically keep on moving the camera around. It's still a live view. And that's pretty good in terms of being able to work with the image, but it's not really the highest quality view right now. So we're looking at this thing and it's kind of okay in terms of what's going, but it's really not the highest quality right now. If I really want to ratchet things up and have a higher quality rendering, okay, that doesn't quite look as grainy and doesn't have, it just does a better job of actually representing the light and how this is all going to look, I can render this image. Let's talk about what that'll do. When you render an image, it'll go through and use that photographic material. It'll also compute the light based on whatever you gave it, and for every different surface, it will calculate what the precise amount of light is going to be that's hitting that based on the shadows and the reflection of the light, and it will map that onto that photographic material, so you get something that looks pretty photoreal. So in terms of doing rendering, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can do it either internally, like we talked about last time. You have, in the rendering dialog, let me kind of bring that up again. There are a couple ways to get to that. We can either just choose show rendering down at the bottom, or we can also go to the view tab and choose render there. Either one of those just brings up the same dialog. You have some choices, and we talked about these, where you go all the way from draft up to best, and for every set of choices, you can sort of think about it multiplying probably by about a factor of 2, how much time it's going to take. You have the issue of how much screen resolution you want, and resolution you want in the final product. The amount of data that has to be computed will really determine the time that's required. So screen resolution, which is 72 dots per inch, is okay if it's just going to be on your screen. If you just need to see it on your screen, keep it relatively low. 72 will be fine. It'll save you some time. If you're going to take that image and save it and put it on some poster and blow it up to 3 feet by 4 feet, then you'll want to ratchet it up to 300 dots an inch or 600 dots an inch, something like that. But it'll take a lot longer to do that. Okay, so choose the size that feels appropriate for you. Okay, if we send it to the cloud, then you have less worries about the size because you won't hit the impact. It'll go to the cloud instead. Okay, here's the issue of the sun. Let me just kind of take a look at that, and we'll set that again to Houston. Oh, that's probably fine. 10 in the morning. Says okay. I'll make it 10:30. Okay, we are ready to render. We can choose to go ahead and use that image, or we can use some sky. I'm just going to use the sky that has a little bit of cloudiness to it. I'm going to say, let's go ahead and render. Here's what it's going to do. It is going to go through and calculate first the lighting model. So for the one light that we care about, the sun here, because that's all we said to consider, it'll go through and figure all these different surfaces, what the lighting is. Notice 0 artificial lights, 0 daylight portals, so it's going to be a relatively quick calculation. It'll go through and do this for us. The first thing it does, it's going to complain a little bit because it couldn't find all the materials. That's okay. It's going to go zipping on through, sort of figuring out what the appropriate lighting level on each of those different surfaces are. Okay. Give you something that's okay. As a low rendered image, it kind of does an okay job. It's still a little bit jaggy around the edges over here. The materials are resolving okay. It could definitely sort of be better in terms of what's going on, but it's at least a good first pass to understand, do you have the right material, do you have the right lighting, the kind of the appropriate shadows you want. So this kind of a rendering down at the ground is actually pretty good in terms of helping people understand at a high level what's going on. You can ratchet that up to a medium quality rendering. We'll render that one too. So again, I didn't really change much about the model other than just the degree of fineness. So what's going to happen is it's going to be a little bit better about computing the number of bounces in the light. So it'll be a little softer. It'll also be a little bit better about all these jaggy edges, these really kind of low resolution edges. It'll do a better job of resolving all these things. But in order to do that, you can see it's going to take longer. It's going to do the third pass through here. So we'll just let it do its thing. You've got to keep track of how much time it's taking. It's a little better. What you'll tend to notice is, just these tiny little edges get a little bit smoother. Things tend to be a little bit nicer. Okay. We'll let that finish up. We'll see it's going to probably take, based on this, I guess around 2 minutes. Okay. If I ratchet it up to high, it'll probably take 4 or 5 minutes. If I ratchet it up to very good, it might take 10 minutes, something like that. And you may or may not want to wait that long, so only render as much as you need in terms of how much time you want to spend doing things. Okay. If you decide halfway through that you clearly have a mistake, you don't want to see it, you can always just cancel and close. That'll kind of save you some time there. Well, if you have a rendering you kind of like, let's talk about that. We can save it to the project. I'm going to just give it a name like Courtyard. And what's this medium resolution? Quality. Once you've rendered it though, if you aren't quite happy with the lighting quality, like I did this morning, it turned out to be fairly dark, you can still go through and adjust the exposure. So if it's just not quite, it's a little dark, it's just not reading the way you want it to. What you can do is say, let's adjust the exposure. And in here, these are very much like working with the controls in iPhoto or in Photoshop. I can just sort of brighten it up a little bit after the fact. It's a little bit too bright. Let me pull it back down there. Now, the nice thing about adjusting the exposure is you can sort of pull out the lighting to be a little bit closer to what you want it to look. That's still a little bit bright for me. Don't just swing it very far. For example, if you just push it very far, okay, you may just get totally whited out because you just made the sun so incredibly bright you can't see anything. Okay, so just try to come up with something that looks about right. We can go through and control the high ends and the low ends. Like if I want to get more light in there, but it's looking a little bit too bright, I can make the highlights darker. That just brings down the top of the range. So it's brighter overall, but the whitest whites aren't nearly as white. Kind of bring those down. But there's a whole range of tools you can kind of play with through this. The nice thing about working with the exposure controls is very often you can get the lighting you need out of a rendering without having to re-render it. So if you spent 10 minutes to get something, the lighting wasn't quite as bright as you want to, don't just re-render it. Go ahead and see if you can use the exposure controls to use the same work and just adjust the lighting range so that it kind of looks a little bit better to what your eye wants. So that's not too bad. Let me save that one to the project. That's going to be Courtyard Medium. And I'll go through and say that's adjusted. Now, you can continue to render things just locally. That actually works just fine. Nice thing about local things is you don't need to be connected to the cloud. You don't need any sort of internet connection to do that. But it takes up time on your computer that you might want to be using to kind of keep on modeling or some other sort of work. So if you would prefer not to render on your own machine, you could also render in the cloud. We looked at that just real briefly last time. If I say render in the cloud, you choose what sort of image you like. So I could choose this building courtyard. I could actually choose several different cameras if I want to send several things. So I might get that front area, I might get the building courtyard. I can just choose whichever ones I want to. You can choose whether it's a still image or one of those panoramas. The panorama was the difference between still camera, focused with one specific thing. Panorama, it starts here, but it actually orbits around and gets me the whole 360. Okay, so I can really do that complete spin. Render quality, this is one you might as well just kind of ratchet this one up. There's standard. You can say final if you want to because, you know, it's going to go off to the Amazon server somewhere. You don't really care. It's going to take a few minutes either way. Image size, 1 megapixel. Oh, I'll make it large. Again, knock yourself out. Okay. Exposure is kind of interesting. There's advanced versus native. Native says, I'm controlling the lighting. You listen to me. Advanced says, you know, I believe you. Why don't you go ahead and control the lighting? And it'll do its best to go through and figure out what the high and the low and to try and adapt the range of lighting based on what it's seeing. So it just uses a little computer algorithmic control to try and optimize that. I tend to find that I like advanced. It tends to do a better job than I do. So I'll let it actually use its advanced controls, sort of what type of image we want in the end. I have unlimited units available. If, when you go out and try to do this, you don't see unlimited here, okay, it means that your account, you know, your Autodesk account was set up not through the education community. You could have set it up a lot of different ways. People have Autodesk IDs. If yours doesn't say Education Community Unlimited here, we're going to have you re-sign up through the education community, and that will give you unlimited access to all these services. So make sure you see unlimited there, because otherwise, like commercially, there's a limit and it counts down against a budget, and you don't want to be consuming those. Okay, I'm going to say start rendering. I can email it to me if I want to, or just get notified. It's going to do a little bit of work here. It's basically sending things off to the cloud. It's going to complain that, well, some of these materials are missing. And I know that's true. Those are some things on the inside. We're ready to go. Continue in the background. Okay, I can go back to work. It's doing something now. So I'm working, I'm getting coffee, I'm getting dinner, I'm finishing my assignment 3, whatever it is. It's going ahead and do the work. Okay, it'll tell me in just a second here when it's actually done. Okay, so let's just kind of leave it there. This works for you know, kind of interior renderings. The big things in terms of the exterior renderings are, let's pop back over to where those are. Okay, it's all about just really choosing the quality and the output resolution. That's really the part that's going to control how much time it's going to take. You know, draft all the way up to best. And the more you increase those things, the longer it's going to take. Okay, you can actually go through and just highlight a specific sub-region to render. If you really have a very complicated thing, just test it in a specific area before you take the time to render everything. Okay, sun settings, that's probably the biggest thing you want to pay attention to on exterior renderings. Just make sure you have the sun set to where you want it to be. Yeah, and very often you'll be, oh, it's dark, I don't see any light. And you look at the timing and it's like 9 at night or something like that. So it really does do a good job of trying to adjust the light based on that. You can choose a background style, but you're pretty much ready to go at that point. Okay, let's come back over here. Let's see if we can actually take a look at this. Didn't get my notification yet. I'm going to go out to the gallery and just take a look. See what it did. Looks like it's still working right now. This is one we submitted just a minute ago. Let's see what that one looks like. It's still working on it. Let's see what it's doing. I turned it up to the high quality, so it's taking a little bit longer. than not having it to high quality. But I want to show you the difference in the quality because the effect of the lighting is actually pretty dramatic. Okay, as it's doing that, let me just switch back over here just to kind of show you this one. This actually was a panorama. I'll just let that one work. So just so you sort of see what's happening with the panorama, we did this last time and it took a while and I was wondering why. This is the effect of the panorama. I can just sort of spin around. Looks like that part of the building's cut off. But that's a pretty high quality job. I'm going to let that finish. Okay, notice it's taken about 2 minutes so far for a pretty high quality thing. Again, the difference is it's going to take about 2 minutes out there on the cloud servers. Probably take 5 or 8 minutes, something like that, on your own machine. It really, there is kind of a big advantage to doing it like in the cloud if you have that available to you. So close. There we go. So let's take a look at this. The interesting thing about this as a rendering is it actually has a lot of subtle things. It's definitely a higher quality in terms of what's going on, but it's a little brighter in the day. The reflections, I'm not sure you can hardly see it. This building is actually reflecting back into the glass surface on that building. Okay, so you're really starting to get some very sophisticated lighting effects going on. You can see into the building, you see the stairways, that's where the little upstairs lounge is. You see the reflections in the glass on the other side. You're doing a pretty good job in terms of doing all that stuff. So exterior renderings, just set the camera, kind of make sure the materials are there, and then generally just let it go. As long as you give it a good date and time and all that type of stuff, it'll do its job. Okay. Next time we'll talk about some of the interior rendering stuff, which gets a little more complicated, but for what you're going to be doing for the next assignment, you're going to be doing an exterior rendering of your building design. Okay, and hopefully that'll get you started with what you need there. Any questions about exterior renderings? Make perfect sense. Or enough sense. Okay, beautiful. Let's go ahead then and shift our attention just a little bit. We are going to, I'll put that guy away. Actually, I'm going to open up a new project because we're just going to get started on something a little bit different. I'm going to say no, don't save. Oh, don't do that. Start with an architectural template and get going. So here's the deal. We've been doing our renderings, that's all cool. We're going to actually start looking at kind of a slightly different way of kind of creating buildings that really starts with masses and conceptual masses to do conceptual design, which is really very closely related to what you've been doing with your parts. Your different Revit library components are small instances. We're now going to sort of use those same sort of principles to design entire buildings. And in thinking about that building, the important thing to sort of realize about how most things get done. For example, if you were designing the SEQ quad or the next version of the YE2E2 building or something like that, you would probably get some sort of list of requirements from the users that, they're going to start to specify what they really want to have in the building. So in terms of how people typically talk about a building, they'll often give you some sort of figure that looks like, the total amount of square footage I want is, and they'll give you some number, like 400,000. It'll just be some large number of how much space we have to go through and incorporate to kind of capture all the different functions that we want in the building. Usually they've talked to a lot of users and put together spreadsheets and tallied up that somehow this is the amount of space they need. Okay. They might come back and tell you that, we have some specific uses we need to put into that building. So for example, if I was thinking about a building that might have some retail space and some office space, like one of these little buildings that's in downtown Palo Alto, they can give you some different categories of space. So we can say that, great, okay, I need about, let's say 125,000 square feet of retail, and that would mean that for office, what do I need here? About 275,000 square feet for that. or whatever the ratio is. Those are sort of numbers I'm pulling out just to give us something to work with. So we're going to have some program we're going to want to think about, and then based on that, we're going to try to basically come up with a building that would actually have this shape. Now, to do this, again, you can imagine that if we had to start just sort of building up room at a time, it would take us quite a while to kind of figure out just exactly how to come up. In fact, I think you guys saw it as you were trying to figure out how big your houses were, that coming up with something that's exactly 2,000 square feet is a little bit tough in terms of trying to make it work that way. So let's take a look at it doing it in a very different way, which is top down as opposed to bottom up. And to get started with our new project, there's always a couple things we'd like to do. One is we'd like to go ahead and give our building a location. Okay, so if you want to give your building a location, I'm going to switch over to the Manage tab, and you'll see there's actually something called the location of the building. We also got to the same dialog by setting the sun. It's really just bringing you to the same place where we choose a location, and we can choose something. So I need a location for my building. And again, we'll take any city. Give me a city. Give me a strange city. Go.
Oslo?
Oslo. Well, that's okay. Sounds like someplace I'm going to go sometime soon. Oslo, Norway. Okay, I like that as an example because it's going to have sort of an interesting energy profile to it. It'll be very different. The problem whenever we do buildings for the Stanford campus is you don't really see much of an energy impact because we have a very favorable climate here. You've probably figured out that we just don't hit any of the extremes. It's sort of nice during the winter and it's nice during the summer. So it's hard to make a very big difference when you have such a good climate to start out with. Okay, we got a location. We now have a latitude, we have a longitude, so the sun will look good. We also have a weather profile. Okay, so we know a lot about really what the temperature is going to be throughout the year and all the different times of the day. That's all recorded and kind of lives on big scientific servers for us. Okay, for this building, another little piece that'll help us understand the building is to think about the floor levels. Let me tell you about that, because we're going to go ahead and sort of create some shapes that are volumes, and we need to convert those shapes into square footages. So just understanding what our floor-to-floor height is just helps us do that, because if you have 10-foot floor-to-floor heights versus 20, it makes a big difference in terms of how much shape we need to get the same amount of square footage. Okay, so for that, I'll go ahead and zoom on in here, and I'll say, 10 feet. Turns out 10 feet, the default assumption, it works for residential scale buildings. It really doesn't work for commercial scale buildings. If you think about even the floor-to-floor height of this building, what do we have? We are probably, I don't know if it's 11 or 12 feet to this ceiling here, but really the floor above us is several feet higher still because there's room for ductwork and piping, and there's all this stuff in there. There's like this sandwich of probably 2.5 feet. If you're in the Psyche-I room, you can see it all exposed in there. There's another like 2.5 or 3 feet we don't even see, structural elements. So a higher floor-to-floor height probably makes sense. I'm going to make it 15 feet, just because that feels about right for a commercial scale building. But again, you'll have some sense about that as you do more and more design work based on like your previous experience about how high your floor-to-floor heights are going to be. Now, 15 feet was okay for that one floor level. If I want to have some more, because I'm not really quite sure. I might try making a tall tower. I might try making a low flat building. I might want to give myself some more levels to work with if I want to say it's more than just level 1 and level 2. So to do that, what I'm going to do is just add some more floor levels so we can kind of entertain structures that are a little bit taller. On the Architecture tab, you'll see there's a level tool. It's kind of hanging out over here. If you choose the level tool, you have the choice, and I think a lot of you have played with this already. You can draw the levels or offset the levels. And what I tend to do is I'll offset the level. When I have a very repetitive thing, I always want to copy and make the next one 15 feet away, I'll offset it. I'll choose it and make a copy 15 feet away. So I can say, let's grab that, put in some sort of offset. And the nice thing about offsetting is I just have to hover over. It'll say, great, this is where 15 feet away looks or would be. And I can just, oops, I actually went a little too low. Try that again. What it is, if I'm slightly above, it'll put it above. If I'm slightly below the line, it'll put it down right on top of level 1. I have to be slightly above the line. Level 3, let me zoom on out just so you can see that better. I'll put level 4 in there, I'll put level 5, level 6, So I can sort of really spit these out pretty quickly. Notice for each of them, I'm getting a new floor plan, I'm getting a new ceiling plan. It's just kind of creating new floor levels for me. What do I got now? I'm up to 9. Let me give me 10's about the highest building I can imagine. There'll almost always be some sort of limitation on the height. The city or the county will impose some sort of planning restriction that says how tall you can build it. But give yourself some levels to work with. Okay, you got a nice framework now. We have a location, we have something that's going to help us divide forms up into individual floor areas. We're now ready to start playing around and seeing if we can generate something that actually has these 400,000 square feet. That's actually a fair amount of square footage. So let's show you how you can do that. I can go to level 1 if I want, or I can do it in 3D, either way, but I'll start in level 1 just flat so I can sort of see and draw relatively precisely. What I'm going to do is, as opposed to putting down a lot of walls, doors, and windows, the way we were sort of creating things from the bottom up, I'm going to go to the Massing and Site tab, and I'm going to choose something different. Under Massing and Site, you have this notion of an in-place mass. I've actually played around with that a little bit before, but that's this notion of can we extrude or blend together different shapes that are the overall shape of the building, and then use that to actually generate the building. Okay, so can you really describe a building just in terms of its envelope? So I can say in-place mass. It's going to warn me at this point. It says, hey, I don't usually show you masses because they're not real things. They're just kind of construction lines. So it's going to tell me, I'll turn them on for you, but let me warn you about that. They're not typically here. I'll say share. That's okay. I'm going to call that my building envelope. We are ready to start drawing. And I'm going to start with something really simple. I'm just going to make sort of like a rectangular shape. I'll get more complicated, but I'm going to make it a rectangular shape to get going. So I'll grab a rectangle and just draw it on level 1. I'm not going to pay too much attention to its size right now. I can rotate that up into 3D if you want to. There it is, just going to lie in there on the floor. If I have a profile, okay, and I would like to make that into an extrusion, okay, in the mass environment, you don't even need to go through and, what is it? Yeah, what do I want to say? You just need to choose it, and then you can say create a form out of it, and it'll extrude it for you, kind of make a box for you out of it. Like all the different mechanisms we've worked with before, extruding, blending, sweeping, they all work, but there's actually some shortcuts in here because you don't have to actually explicitly declare whether it's an extrusion or a evolve. It will figure it out based on what you're selecting. If you only select a single profile, it will try to extrude it for you. If I excluded a profile and a line, it would say, oh, you probably want to sweep that profile along the line. It has its own sort of funny notion of how this does this. So I've created a basic box there. It's not a very interesting box, but it's a box. If you want to, you can choose the surface of the box. Like, oh, that's the back surface. I might have to tab, that's the front surface, or the top surface. You see I have these little kind of control, like displacement handles that let me go through and pull that up if I like. I can grab the front end of the box too. I might have to tab to grab it. I can pull that forward. But I'm creating this basic just rectangular box right now. And I can have this draggable and do it this way. I can actually put parameters in here if I wanted to and have it resize like those boxes we've been resizing in your parts. It's all the same principle. But for now, just go ahead and finish that up. I just want to get a box out there. Okay. Pretty boring so far. But here's where the magic starts to happen. Okay, I have this thing which is called just a mass form. Okay, it's kind of just hanging out there. I'd love to say, what if that mass was actually the envelope of a building? How many square feet would be in there? And if I choose the mass, you'll actually see that it knows what the volume of the mass is. It's real good about computing how many cubic feet are in there. It even can tell you how much surface area is in there. So at some high level, I can tell you a little about how much skin is on that building right now. Okay. But what I want to do is go one step further and actually divide it into floors so I can go through and compute the floor area. So how you do that is you choose that mass. And again, I've closed the mass. I was editing a mass and I said finish the mass. I have to be outside of it so I can just select it, not that I'm editing it. And you can choose this option right here called Mass Floors. Mass Floors will show you all your different floor levels. And what it will say is, okay, for the mass that you've selected, tell me all the different floor plates you want to cut that up into. So I will go ahead and choose all these different levels. Say OK to that. And you'll see it's divided it up. Let me shade it so you can see it a little bit better. It's divided into a whole bunch of different little floor plates. So if I put a floor at each of those different levels, this is what the floors would look like. You can choose those floors. I could say that, oh, on level 2, I have a floor which currently has about 8,000 square feet or 8,800 square feet. That's kind of okay to start. That's looking pretty good. This is a very regular building, so that's not all that surprising. If I choose 3 and 4, they're going to be about the same. The nice thing about forms and mass floors, though, is that you can go ahead and, if you grab the mass, you can push and pull on it. Okay, so it has little handles that let you stretch it out a little bit. Maybe I'll stretch this out a little bit. And I can even go a little bit taller if I want to. And what's happening is within that form, it's going to keep on dividing it up into all these different floor plates. And you can actually sort of see in this area right here, there's the volume, there's the surface area, there's also the floor area that you can read right now. Okay, so this isn't so bad. I was thinking I was going to really have a hard time getting to 400,000 square feet, but if it's just kind of pushing and pulling on the box, I might be able to get there. So I can try different things, like I can make sort of a really long whatever building that's about like that. What does that have? That has about 500,000 square feet to it right now. A little bit too big. I might push that back a little bit. That's 486,000 square feet. That's not too bad. Maybe it just needs to be one less level to it. Maybe even one level still further. Not losing enough there. Let me pull it back a little bit. But I can start just pushing and pulling on this thing and trying to come up with what I want. And that's pretty good. Just getting started with the whole thing. If I want to also think about, oh, some things being retail and some being office, you know, the overall square footage is pretty good, but it'd be nice to actually be able to control, you know, maybe some of the floors are retail, some are office, and be able to tag them and tally those things up. And you can. Each of the different floors can be summarized. For example, if I choose a floor area, it doesn't even have that tag. Yes, it does right there. There's this notion of something called the usage. I could say, you know, that's going to be a retail floor. Maybe I'll make floor 1 a retail floor also. That would probably make sense. That's the mass right now. I'll make that a retail floor. I'll make the others offices in just a second. But, you know, I'd really like a way to be able to summarize this. Because, you know, this is kind of okay, but I'd really love like a nice Excel spreadsheet that has it all in there and stays updated automatically as I make these changes. So let's do that, because that we can go through and create here too. We can create a type of view called a schedule. You've been using schedules so far to tally up windows and doors and things like that. You can tally up floor area too. That's perfectly valid. You can say view, and there's this create a new schedule. So, oh, you'll go looking for mass floors. You don't find mass floors. You do find mass and some things underneath it. There's mass floor. It's kind of hiding around in there. So you choose what it is you want to tally up. These will be the rows on the spreadsheet or in the schedule. I'll say mass floors looks good. Which columns do you want in here? And I'm going to put the floor level in there. I'm going to put the floor area here. I'm going to put the use in there. So just grab all 3 of those things, just so I can have a nice little table that summarizes all that stuff. Say OK to that. So I got these 37,307 on each of these rectangular floors. I can decide that those are all going to be office. Just put that in there. Okay, now that floor area schedule is looking pretty good. It'd be nice to go ahead and have a little separation in it. For example, might want to put a subtotal down or a grand total down at the bottom and maybe subtotals under each of those areas. And if I want to do that, I can do some sorting and grouping. Maybe I'll sort it out by usage and then by the level. And I'll put a little footer down at every use area so all the retails will get subtotaled and all the offices will get subtotaled. I'll also put a grand total on there. That way I get a total on the whole thing. In terms of what numbers to report, the floor area is probably the most interesting one to total for me. Oops. See what happened there. Formatting, floor area, calculate totals. Okay. So I can tell you right now, there's 261,000 square feet of office, there's 74,615 of retail, for a total of 355. Yeah, we're not too awfully bad, which is what's going on. What I'd love to do is kind of get that 3D view and the scheduled view together, so I can kind of look at them both at the same time. And I can do that. Let me close a bunch of windows that I don't need. I'll close that one too, so I don't need that one. I'm going to open the two windows that I want, and I will say, let's tile them. Let me zoom that to fit. Okay, so now, with these two windows, I got this window over here with a shape, I have this window over here with a little table. I can go through and just real quickly choose that and start pushing and pulling. See if I can come up with some different alternatives. Okay, so not too awfully bad. Let us do this. Let's go ahead and we'll break for about 5 minutes now. And we'll stop and answer some questions for people who are having questions and stuff like that. But what we will do is come on back and say, okay, this is pretty interesting in terms of getting started. But, if we all just wanted to make sort of boring rectangular buildings, like we probably could have done this by hand. So we're going to take a look at how we can adapt those forms to really make them more interesting and kind of create more fluid shapes. We're also going to go ahead and take a look at how we can take that very simple model, that big old boxy model, and actually predict how much energy that building is going to use over the next 30 years. Okay, so really kind of cool stuff to help us figure out, do I want a big kind of cubic building? Do I want a real low flat one? Do I want a tall skinny tower? I have a lot of ways I could play this. And it will help us decide that. Okay, so let's go ahead and break. Come on back in 5.